This debate is a question of competing strategies. Their strategy of the one UC is to identify white supremacy as the overarching system and how we can deal with system of oppression and how white supremacy should not target how white supremacy should not target the black body. However, our argument is our starting point is a starting point that analyzes patriarchy and sexism before we can actually discuss white supremacy. Here are a few reasons why. First of all, is the fact that discussions are always going to be corrupted. Our hoax evidence indicates that whenever we have discussions of white supremacy, it's always whenever we have discussions of white supremacy, it's always a discussion of how the black males are always put on the forefront of the discussion, and white women's experiences are never valued in the first place. She gives the example of how she went to discussion panels all around the country and how in an all-black panel it was only the men that were allowed to talk and having a dialogue. However, she was forced. She was not allowed to talk about her experiences with race and her experiences as being a black woman because of the fact that discussions are always limited to a male perspective. Second is the fact that this leads to the devaluation of the black females as well as the problem with patriarchy. When in the 1 year they say that we can't focus on patriarchy because it fractures the movement of dealing with white supremacy. That is exactly what Hooks is talking about. That when we always put white supremacy at the forefront and identify white supremacy as a root cause, that means we never deal with the question of how patriarchy functions within our society and how women are excluded. Not only that, but this means that our analysis is always going to be incomplete because we get in the perspectives of the white women, the white male, and the black male, but never the perspective of the black woman, which means that the scholarship that the 180 presents is fundamentally problematic because it leads to the exclusion. It leads to the exclusion. Not only that, but also this means it fractures the entire movement because you cannot analyze white supremacy if you do not analyze the way that it oppresses all groups of people. They assume all groups of people in the first place. At the top of the Twitter, he presents this spit about his mother as well as the spit from the tweets. All arguments about are all linked to the criticism. Our link is not that when you use it when you use the N-word, it's only referring to the men. Or arguing the fact that you do not acknowledge the fact that black women have a perspective in the first place. All the spit that they present in the tweeting about how the 16-year-old and their mother and the cross-examination about how they came out of their mother does not assumes the fact that they can speak. That is all they have to. That is all they have to contribute in the first place. That they don't have more to say, which is another link to the argument. All the arguments that they make when we say no link arguments are that we include the perspectives of the female body, but they are speaking for them. When in the 1NC, we do not speak for Lauryn Hill, which is why we do not spin in this way around. Because first of all, we are letting her speak. We are acknowledging the fact that she has something to say when she talks about I get out and getting out of the boxes of they defy interpret white supremacy, but it's also getting out of the boxes of the way that feminism is constructed. The whole album is an attack on the music industry and its sexist ways. Like the song Adam Lives in Theory and Mystery Intentional are all part of the album and talk about how the way that misogyny functions within the music industry is fundamentally bad, which means that which is why we let Lauryn Hill talk in the first place. They talk about Asada in the 1 year. However, this does not make sense. This is exactly our argument that the commodification argument turns on them. That in the 2AC when they present the split of the 16-year-old and when they talk about their when they all of a sudden talk about Asada in the 1 year, this is the argument that we're trying to make. That whenever we present the discussions of how black females are excluded, they always strike back by saying no, it's not. Here's a spit about them. That means that the commodification argument that they make is independent reason to reject them. All that on to the commodification argument that they make against us. This commodification argument doesn't apply because we are not using because we're not using Lauryn Hill as a functional subject. We in the 1NC when we present Lauryn Hill, we are interpreting that as an answer to the answer and a criticism to the 1AC strategy of dealing with white supremacy. That we cannot just singularly deal with white supremacy. Rather, we have to analyze patriarchy before we can analyze white supremacy. That we have to get out of the boxes of how racial discussions are confining the status quo with only letting white males and and black males talk, which is why the commodification argument doesn't make sense. We have engaged in all the arguments that you make all in the 20. I go through each part of their 1AC and the splits that they make about how it's not about how we concede certain functions, about how the law targets black bodies. Yes, we concede that because this debate is a question of strategy and how we deal and what type of oppression we have to deal with in the first place. Our argument is the fact that we have to deal with the exclusion of black women before we can deal with the violence that is committed through white supremacy. Because our hooks evidence talks about how those movements will never automatically be fractured because it's not sufficient enough to just have the experience of the black male. Rather, we need voices of black females as well in the first place. Now they make this Judy argument about over-determining. No, we are not. Hooks is not over-determining this argument. Hooks is talking about how the first of all, the Judy argument doesn't apply to the criticism because we're not talking about the human subject. Even if they identify the black female as not a human subject, this does not mean that the argument doesn't mean that the argument doesn't apply because our argument is that even if black females are not considered to be subjects according to Judy, their perspectives are always going to be limited in the first place. And the over-identification argument doesn't make sense because the Hooks is identifying the way that power structures operate when we have discussions in the status quo and how they're not helpful to how they exclude black women, which means that their knowledge argument doesn't matter. They have not given a single reason as to why our strategy of dealing with patriarchy before dealing with white supremacy is problematic. That's the reason why you have to vote negative.
703.